Thank you for coming back. We got a treat for you now. We got Adam Cheyer here, who's actually one of the co-founders of the product that became Siri. And now he's working for Samsung, VP for assistants. You know, assistants when you're like, oh, Siri, can you ask Alexa if Cortana knows where the best restaurant is around here? And Google sits in the corner saying, OK. These kind of things. It's not easy to build those things because it gives us this magic of AI. Like these assistants are very cool when they really work, but we always try to make them trip up and basically say like, okay, let's see how stupid that thing really is. So you're in that moment where you want to create delight with people, but you're not necessarily on the right spot because people don't trust these things yet. So now we're going to hear from Adam Cheyer what they're doing with Bixby in the Samsung platform, which you might have used already or you might use right after his talk. So without me stealing even more time, Adam, please go ahead.
Thank you. It's great to see everybody here back in Vienna. I'm proud of you for lasting so late into a second-day conference. But I think like many of you, I'm an AI developer and an entrepreneur. I co-founded Siri and helped run that at Apple in the early days. And now we have a new technology. I started a new company called Viv Labs and sold that to Samsung 2 years ago. And what I'm here to tell you today is what I think is the third new idea in intelligent assistants. And I think I'm biased, of course, but I think maybe the first idea in the mass market was Siri itself. It really set the tone for what assistants should be like, what people expected. The second big idea came from a company, AI, which sold to Facebook, where they showed how to open up a third-party ecosystem. And Alexa Skills and Google Assistant all use similar techniques. And today, we're going to show you a radically different approach, and we're going to give you a radically different approach for how to turn the assistant into something truly important. And let's talk about that. So I'm old, and so I take the historical perspective. I realized looking back that every 10 years, the way people interact with computers changes. So in the 80s, Steve Jobs came out with the mouse and Windows and really set the paradigm of the graphical user interface was how we interacted with computers when the desktop landed on your desk and at that time. And just a historical note, in 4 days will be the 50th anniversary of the original creation of those ideas by a man named Doug Engelbart, who defined multiple windows, invented the mouse, hyperlinks, multimedia browsers, et cetera. So 80s, that's the way we used to do it. But 10 years later, along came something called the web. And now every business and every developer had to learn about hyperlinks and URLs and HTML. 10 years later, almost like clockwork, in came the smartphone. And now users were learning about apps and pinch and zoom and back buttons and things of that sort. So if you've been counting, this is the 10th anniversary of the App Store. And I think, how many of you have gone to the App Store in the last week or month saying, I think I'll find a new app today, you know, something new and exciting? Raise your hands. Oh. Really? That's pretty good. That's more than I expected. But in my view, most people want less apps. I'm happy with the apps. If I need an app, I'll get one. But I'm not going to find more apps for my phone. People are starting to get tired of, I mean, mobile's important. Don't get me wrong. But I can see the saturation. There are 3 million apps ahead of you in the App Store. If you're trying to create a business based on an app, it's a hard slog. So the question is, what is the new interface paradigm that's going to dominate for the next 10 years? I'm a little biased, but my answer, of course, is the assistant. Now, I'm the first to recognize that assistants today, like Siri or Alexa or Google Assistant or Bixby, are useful. They get billions of queries every week. But they're not important. If I were to say, I'm going to take away your assistant, you'd be like, OK. But if I said, I'm taking away your web browser, your smartphone, now that's a problem, right? So we think assistants can actually elevate to a new paradigm, to be more important than the web and mobile. And I'll see if I can convince you of that in a while. First of all, you might ask, say, I've got enough paradigms. Why do I need a new paradigm every 10 years? It's just really difficult. The answer is there are new contexts. So in the same way that the web browser freed you up to computing on faraway machines, and the same way that the mobile phone freed you up from doing computing instead of at your desk, you could now do it on a park bench. Assistants will enable computing in new contexts where it does not make sense today for a web browser or a smartphone. Can you think of any? I'll give a few examples. So one, if you're jogging with your smartwatch, you're not going to be surfing the web. If you're driving in your car, I hope you're not texting or using apps or web browsers on your phone. If you're in the kitchen washing dishes or preparing a meal, it's inconvenient. And there are many more situations. But in all of these situations, a voice assistant who knows you, understands you, knows what you like, and can help you accomplish tasks, that does work. And that means for all of you developers who are selling content and services, that's a new opportunity, a new channel that can bring you computing to moments that are not being served right now. So next, you might say, well, why is it that assistants today aren't important? They're just useful. They're just a utility. So at Viv Labs and now at Bixby, we've defined 4 things needed to take the assistant from being useful to being a paradigm more important than the web or mobile. So what are those 4? Number 1, I want one assistant. Well, if you use any of the assistants out on the market today, you'd say, well, that's one assistant, isn't it? But actually, think about it, it's not. Each of those assistants come pre-programmed by one company, like Alexa, has Amazon, Apple, Google, et cetera. And it does a few things. You can say, play a song, send a message, what's the weather? But if you wanted to access a third party today, you have to say, assistant, ask App 7 to do Command 5. And many of the big marketplaces have tens of thousands of services. Well, I can't remember tens of thousands of names and command sets. And each one of those assistants is independently developed, shares no information across to other assistants. It's just fragmented. And if you think about language, language is not fragmented. If I say, I want to book a restaurant on the 3rd Thursday of the month, I should be able to say, I want to book a hotel on the 3rd Thursday of the month. I mean, it makes sense. But if they're independently developed with completely different styles and technology, you're not going to get that cohesive one assistant who knows me. Second, today, assistants, the little that they know you, are typically associated with a particular device. If you use something like Siri on your phone, you use Siri on your TV, it's not the same Siri. And unless you're doing some syncing between devices, it does not. Those are 2 different assistants. And I can't keep track of, what does my car assistant know about me? What does my TV assistant do? It's too much cognitive load. For the assistant to be important, we want one assistant where the device is the context. It's the microphone, it's the screen, it can communicate with you. But if I told it something over here with this device, it should know it when I ask a request over here on a different device. One assistant available on any device. Next, powered by every service. Well, there are tens of thousands of services in many of the ecosystems today. But as I mentioned, it's really hard to get to them. And if you go forward a few years, and we now had 1 million services or 5 million services, I can still only remember a handful. I'm not going to use more services if there are 40,000 versus 4 million. I can still only remember 4 or maybe 10. So, and additionally, as developers, you know that the tools that these assistant companies give you are very different than the tools the engineers of the companies who make the assistants get to use. If you're at Google working at Google Assistant, I find it hard to believe that they're using API.ai, which is what they give third-party developers to use, and similar for any company. So in my view, to date, third-party developers have been second-class citizens, right? And the interaction is different. You know, if you ask a built-in command, what's the weather, set a timer, that's different than if you have to say, ask app 7 to do command 5. So it has not been leveled, and that's holding back the assistant landscape. And the final point that we think is required to elevate an assistant to be paradigm scale, as important as the web and mobile, is an assistant should be personal to you. Your mobile experience is different than my mobile experience because you have apps that are different than mine. Maybe we have an overlap of 10 apps or something. We both use mail or messaging. But your experience is defined by the set of things you can do on that phone. Today, every assistant is the same for every user. There's no real deep personalization or configuration available. And we think that's not right. That's not going to get us to the next step. So those are the 4 points that we set about 6 years ago as Viv Labs to define a scalable ecosystem that can really unleash the power of the assistant in a way that hasn't been done yet today. As I mentioned, 2 years ago, we sold to Samsung. And now Viv Technology is rolling out under the brand name Bixby, or the new Bixby. There was a Bixby Samsung had before we were involved. This is our new Bixby. The summary of what it is, it meets those points. So we see us moving away from a world of apps on your phone and freeing that content and services to make it accessible from anywhere in the cloud. We see it interacting through an assistant who knows you, who knows your preferences, who learns over time. And no matter what device you're accessing it from, you're dealing with the same assistant who can do the services that you care about. We want to access that from every Samsung device. Samsung has come out and said we're going to have one UI across Samsung by 2020. And Bixby is their intelligent platform across the company. And Samsung has committed to opening up Bixby beyond Samsung devices. So when you start to develop for Bixby, you'll know that it'll be everywhere. There'll be an open API on the front end, the device side, that will make this an open ecosystem for all. I'm just going to highlight a few parts. I don't know if you've used the new Bixby. It's available today only on the Note 9. And it'll be rolling out massively in the coming year. Things that you can do. One is you don't have to use names and command sets. You can ask naturally to get things done. What are the top events here in Los Angeles tonight? When you get a request to that, rather than giving lists and lists of here are 50 things you can do, we think an assistant should help you get the job done. So we have this notion where the assistant can curate and personalize 3 results that are shown at the top, the best ones that it thinks are right for you. And it'll tell you why. This is the most popular. This is trending now. This is right based on your preferences that I've learned about you. So making that job easier. And then finally, with Bixby, you can complete the task end to end in the assistant experience with no punch outs needed. Because if you think about it, if I need to punch out to an app, what if I'm not using a phone? What if I'm driving in my car hands-free or using a smart speaker in my kitchen, et cetera? So end to end with payments, transactions, everything can be completed without ever leaving the Bixby experience. So as I mentioned, Bixby today is on the Note 9. It's going to be rolling out across Samsung. Today, Samsung has an install base of over 1 billion devices. And they're devices in your customers' homes today. Right? They're #1 in mobile by far. They're #1 worldwide in the TV market. They are #1 in US and the portable speaker market through acquisition of Harman Kardon and the car information systems, so all the systems in cars, fridges, washing machines, microwave ovens. Samsung is everywhere, and they will be rolling out Bixby into your homes through these devices. So this creates a huge opportunity to now take your wares, to create new services, and sell into these new contexts that you're not accessing today. So today, what we're bringing you as a gift is a free new developer experience. This is the first time we're talking about it in Europe. We call it Bixby Developer Studio. And I will show you a little demo, a live demo about what it means to build for Bixby in a few minutes. But before I do that, I want to say a little bit about why the technology is so important and why it's different than anything you've ever done as a developer before, I think. You can see me after. If you said, no, I did that in the 80s, I'll be impressed. So here's how it works. For decades, the relationship between the developer and the computer was a simple one. The developer told the computer what to do. Said program statement 1, statement 2, if statement 3, then statement 4. Very, very human-driven experience. Now, you guys are AI developers, so you know in the last 5, 7 years, it's become much more interesting where developers often now just present examples to the machine. Here's the inputs. This is the desired output. Here's a whole bunch of them. And the machine is the one that's actually creating the logic about what the program should be. And it does it in a way that humans can't even understand. Now, we just had a talk on explainable AI today, so maybe you can understand little pieces of it. But what is the next step, the next paradigm for how computing happens? You're going to get a chance to try it with Bixby. We think it'll be a collaboration between human and AI working together to write the code that handles every user request. So there was just a talk on augmenting human intelligence. And we've seen that in medical use cases that a doctor plus AI can do better than a doctor alone. This will be a case, we believe, that a developer plus an AI working together will be able to do things that you will not be able to do just as a developer. So we call this dynamic program generation. And the way it works is that developers, humans, are good at knowing structure. And they will describe the concepts and the actions that exist, but in a very micro-services kind of way. And when a request comes in, it's actually going to be the AI that composes the program on the fly for that request to handle the user's task. So that's a slightly different approach, and it has some benefits. So let me give you an example of just what it would feel like in an assistant point of view. So one assistant that I worked on years ago, you could say something like, what's the weather in Boston? And an AI classifier would say, that's a weather request. And Boston is the entity name of type city. Great. So now you've done the intent understanding. But what happens next? As a developer, you have to write the code to handle that use case. You'd say, OK, Boston, I better call the mapping server and find out where Boston is. It turns out there are 13 Bostons in the United States. Well, which one is it? Is it the closest one, or the biggest one, or the one that is the capital? I better write some logic, or I hope someone's written some logic. Well, maybe the user actually lives in Texas, right near Boston, Texas. Maybe I should apply some learning to learn that. I'll code that in. OK, now I know which city. I get the lat long. I call a weather server. I retrieve the weather information. And then I compose a card and a dialogue and say, here's the weather in Boston and sunny. That's what happens. You'd do the same thing if I said, where does my sister live? Contact request. OK, I need to query. Oh, which sister? There are 2 sisters. I should ask which sister, make a request, maybe learn, because he always talks about the same sister. Well, here's the address. Developers hardwire every use case. So in previous generation assistants, you can say, what's the weather in Boston? You can say, where does my sister live? But you can't say, what's the weather where my sister lives? I thought this was AI we're talking about. Well, why? Because I would now need to code the use case. OK, I'm a weather program. I need to query the context, figure out which sister, learn, et cetera. And then I say, what's the weather at the Super Bowl? Oh, different program. And in fact, there's a combinatorial explosion of possible ways you could combine this. And in addition, what if I said, when it rains at my sister's house, turn off the sprinklers? In that case, the weather program is actually a sub-piece, so it shouldn't be showing a card and dialogue. It's just a little cog in a much larger goal. And so that's generally the way dynamic program generation will work. At the intent level, imagine you said, flight to Super Bowl. Well, the goal is to get a flight. Super Bowl's an entity name of type concert or event. Well, what do? You will not have to write the code to figure out that you should query some event service, get the event service, see if there's multiple possible matches, learn from those matches. Everyone says Super Bowl of football, not Super Bowl of bowling. Get the venue, convert it to a lat long, search for a region, find airports, learn which airports matter. All of that is code that will be written for you by an AI. So, cool idea. Sounds ambitious. No one that I know of has ever tried to do this at internet scale. How do I give it a try? You go to bixby.developer.samsung.com. You can download a full-fledged IDE where you get to not a web lightweight thing, but a full IDE that has static compilation, lets you manage your own version control on your own file systems, and create what we call capsules, the encapsulation of a Bixby interface for your content and services. And you'll be able to plug in this into, it becomes an extension to the capabilities of a user's Bixby assistant that can now do anything that you define that you would do on the web or through mobile. Make your capsule interface. And you'll be able to do it with efficient reuse across code, across many devices and languages. So I'm going to hearken to the demo gods and show you a live demonstration of the system. So first, when you go to that website and you sign up and log in, you arrive at the Bixby Developer Center. First thing you can do is you can download the Developer Studio for either Windows or Mac. And we have all sorts of documentation, user guides, reference guides, sample code. You can manage teams and capsules where you define who's going to work on my projects and which capsules, kind of the app equivalent, will I work. All of the documentation is searchable through a beautiful interface where we have reference guides and developer guides. So Developer Center is the getting started knowledge community and download point. And once you develop the IDE, you download the IDE, you now get to build capsules. You can either create a new capsule or open an existing capsule. And so for this demonstration, to show this space-age technology, I'm going to use an example of space resorts. So think of space resorts kind of like hotels on Mars. I know Elon Musk is working hard to get us there, so any day now it's coming. Now, when you build a capsule, how do you do it? The first thing you do is you need to describe the concepts, the objects in the world, and the actions that can operate on them. So a space resort is basically a structure that has a list of properties. So it has things like what planet is it on, what's the name of the resort, what's its gravity ratio. And you can have requirements. Is this a required property? Is it, can you have more than one of them? Is it a list or a single? Just by defining those things. And there's autocomplete at every step. So it's very, very easy to know what can I say, what can I do. So that's an example of a concept. And an action, find space resorts, will take in some input search criteria and return a list of those resort objects that I just created. So pretty straightforward. And if you have an API, you probably have object definitions and action definitions. It's pretty easy to make a representation in this. So that's step one. Step two, and now it gets to the interesting part, is you now are going to define your use cases. And how do you do it? Through language. So I'll give in a space resort example, I might say something like, I want a reservation for 2 people at a space resort on Mars with an oxygen bar. Got to have one of those. All right, so that's an input example of a training item. And I say, well, what do I do from here? What's the goal? What's the object I'm trying to get to? I want a reservation. I want to make a reservation. So I specify the endpoint. And then I can tag the inputs. So Mars is of type planet. And you notice autocomplete makes this faster and easier. Oxygen bar, that's a search criteria of some sort. And 2 people, let's see, that's going to be the number of astronauts that I want to bring with me on this space voyage. So I can save. And now watch this. This is where it gets crazy. This part, other assistants can do. You're tagging the input, the intent. But here, a program has just been written for me automatically using all of the concepts and actions I've defined. And it encompasses every part of interaction I need. If I ask for something and there are 2 of them, and I need one, by my model definition, it'll say which one. It'll automatically learn from that. So if I always say the Super Bowl of football, not the Super Bowl of bowling, it'll stop asking me the question. So it's an adaptable program with machine learning built in. If I say Boston, Texas all the time, it'll start learning that for when I say Boston, that's the one I mean, automatically. So it interacts with every question. If it needs something, it asks, and it learns from every interaction. So I hit the compile button to train my new use case. It's now learned, and I can bring up one of the simulators and actually see what my program does. So I'll give it a similar query, but I need a reservation for 3 people at a resort on Jupiter that has orbital ziplining. It's one of the most popular activities on this space resort. So here it says, which space resort am I interested in? I've got a few to choose from. I can drill in and see beautiful details. So for every object that you interact with, you define a layout very, very easily to say what should it look like as a summary and a detail. In general, what does the layout look like? So Europa's Jewels, got a nice gallery. It looks pretty nice. It's got subatomic magic shows. Love that. And it's got the orbital zip lining I need for my family. So I'll go ahead and book it. Now, it prompts, because I didn't say when I want to stay, so I can either use a nice GUI interface to choose the dates, or at any time, you can speak and use language, because it's just part of the conversation. So I'll say the weekend of Christmas 2027. I'm figuring we might have space resorts on Jupiter by then. Now it's asking me what kind of room. And over time, it will stop asking this question when it learns that when I go with 2 people, I want the romantic one. But if I'm going with 3 people, my family, I'll take the cheaper option. So I can drill in, change anything. And like this, I've now booked my resort on Mars transactional without ever leaving the assistant. It can all be done through conversation or a mixture of GUIs and conversation. And all of this, I'll show the developers in the room a behind-the-scenes debugging view. So you can actually see the program we had earlier was simplified. And when you actually had to drill it, all of this code, the sequence of steps of operations, et cetera, was written by the AI for me. And I get a complete view where I can drill in and see every result that's happened in the system, see what happened and trace it, control it. So it really is a new way of developing, where you create the content, the structure, and the raw actions. The AI is writing the code per user request, and it throws it away right after that, because tomorrow they might have a different set of capsules that'll behave in a different way. So it's very, very dynamic. And last thing I'll show you, so as you continue to build out your use cases, of course, any good developer knows you need regression tests. We have a very cool way of building tests graphically. I'm going to run my regression test live. So it's a dialogue, has a conversation flow. I don't know why the internet's going so slow. There it's going. But it will run and say, OK, what if I ask find space resorts, and then I followed up conversationally with orbital zip lining, and then I click on the second result. So you can add new steps just by clicking or talking, and then write assertions in JavaScript to do tests on your functions. And so you build out your capsule, teach it everything you need to know. The AI helps you. And when you're all done, you go to the submission page. You submit your capsule for potential inclusion or for inclusion into the upcoming Bixby marketplace. So that's kind of the new approach. I think it's quite different from anything you've seen in the assistant space. It follows the guidelines and the paradigms of what we think will elevate the assistant from being a useful tool that people only use to do a couple of things that they're comfortable with, to an actual paradigm as important to the web or mobile. And with that, I think I will conclude and I know we've been using Slido for any questions. And so I am available and open for questions. The last thing I'll mention, you can go to this URL to give it a try. And hopefully I gave you a taste for that. Thank you.
Excellent. Why do you even talk yourself? You can just let Bixby answer for you, right?
That's true.
I was fascinated you have still Text Wrangler on that box.
Say again?
I'm fascinated to have Text Wrangler still on the box as your editor. I think as engineers, we like our tools, right?
Yes, that's right.
I've seen that in ages. It's amazing.
Yeah, we're using Electron as the distribution platform for cross-platform editor. So it's a downloadable IDE. It's, autocomplete and static checking. So any typo, it'll automatically pick up and match. It's not the right type. So it's pretty sophisticated, pretty full-featured.
Excellent. Okay, one of the main questions, which in Germany or in Europe in general will be the thing you always get, it's a bit away from the development thing, will there be smart assistants in the near future that work without sending all the data to the vendor cloud? How do I work in low latency environments as well?
Yeah, so that is a good question. I think assistants are progressing to have a more offline mode. Speech recognition technologies and some of the AI learning technologies are getting possible to work certainly in the home and maybe even locally on a phone. The issue is that many of the things you want to actually do are elsewhere in the cloud. As opposed to some companies, I often say AI falls into two sides in a gross simplification, knowing and doing. Some companies want to build a giant index of everyone's data and use that to search across. In our mode, we generate a program that will interact with all the web services of the world. So the actual content and data and user access and knowledge and core functionality lives behind their firewall. And so many of the things I want to do live out there. Not everything. So I believe connectedness will always be important. And I do think there are optimizations that if you need to, in your giant program that gets generated, do 3 steps that are all local to your home or to your phone or a device, it can send down a complex request, do all of the local things, and then only return the end result from there. So optimizations will happen, but I believe, what would the web be if you only had local browsing? It's useful, but
well, we're still getting into a world where, when there is connectivity, you can download as much as you want. But if it's on request basis, of course, you never know what people are going to request.
Exactly.
So you can do okay, the local weather I can get down for the next week, so people don't have to ask that every single time.
And it's hard for users to have a model: are they connected or not? And really now you have to think about, oh, is it my local assistant or my remote assistant?
Yeah.
So it adds because they'll behave differently. They can do different things.
And without an interface, you don't even have insights. I mean, when a connection is slow, how do you do that with a voice assistant to actually say, okay, I'm still trying, or I'm still trying? So it's a tricky new UX paradigm that we have to think about that. Yeah.
Yes.
Will Bixby be listening all times on all devices for a voice command? That sounds dubious from a data piracy point of view. Data privacy point of view. That's more or less the same question, and I think we're kind of having it there.
Right. I mean, most assistants today are guarded by either a wake word or a button of some sort. So the listening happens locally. It's not sending anything to a big vendor in the cloud unless you've said the wake word or hit a button. So, if a speaker needs to listen, but it'll only listen for hi Bixby, and if it hears that, then it'll start listening because it thinks you've said a command.
Okay. Interesting one, well, to a degree. So Bixby is under our own big company, Samsung. Why not use the open source solution Mycroft?
Okay, there's 2 parts to that question. So first of all, Viv Labs, which was the company I started, remains an independent subsidiary of Samsung. So our core technology, so Samsung owns us, it's the parent company, but we are fiercely independent and want to open this up and will open this up to devices beyond Samsung. Bixby is Samsung's branded assistant, but in terms of why not the open source solution Mycroft, I know some of the people who work on Mycroft. One of them worked with me at Siri in the old days. But this is radically new technology, and this whole idea of dynamic program generation, the idea of saying, I'm going to write code that writes code, and that's the solution to opening up an assistant is not obvious, and no one else has tried to do this. But it solves so many problems, including privacy and security aspects. I mentioned if you had to hard code the use case, what's the weather at my sister's house? Do I want a third-party system having access to my sister's contacts? Maybe not. I don't know who they are. But if it just takes a lat long in and returns weather information, that lat long is upstream. Might have come from my sister or the Super Bowl. They have no way of knowing, and they don't know how their information will be used below. It's based on user control. So many of the problems of truly opening this up I think, required specialized technology that I don't know of any open source or commercial system attempting what we're doing.
I'm actually very excited about this because my keynote at the We Are Developers event was exactly about that, where I said like that coding will not keep us from being automated away, because things like that don't make any sense to code by hand. It's actually more sensible that you get the use case from an interface that builds it on demand. In essence, we have this with build scripts and we have with deployment scripts already in a very simplified manner. But this, of course, is another level of doing it. But we are getting in a complexity where it makes no sense to actually have the human write the code when the machine could optimize the code better for them. Yeah,
it's a mix. Humans can do things that machines can't, and vice versa. Again, having an AI that is not gamed in any way, other than trying to achieve the user's goals as best it can, gives a certain level of security, privacy, and consistency across all of these different services in a way that you don't get if only humans code it up.
And with generated code, you don't have to. You have the opportunity to have safety measures to stop for injection points and stack overflows, these kind of things as well. So in an intrusion point of way, it's easier to fix them as well when the code was generated, because you just regenerate it rather than going through the code and seeing where the error was.
Yes, perfect. It's very hard to take arbitrary code contributed and do safety checks or security checks or reliability checks on that. It's easy to generate, and really what matters is the integration points of how information flows. That you can have some guaranteed properties based if it's generated automatically.
And performance optimizations, we do the same when in the JavaScript engine, when we turn bytecode into what we need to execute, then we realize, okay, we cache that for you, some kind of thing.
Yeah, perfect.
What's your business plan? Who pays for the super smart programming AI?
Yeah, good question. So
currently Samsung, right?
So Samsung pays for our bill. Thank you, Samsung. And what is the business model? The goal is simply stated to be the next major paradigm that dominates computing interface for the next decade. Right? Every 10 years, web, mobile, and if you think about it, each paradigm had one major winner and maybe one minor winner, because there's always, there's Windows and Mac OS, there's iOS and Android. There's always two, because people want choice. So I think, in the next decade, assistants will, whether it's Bixby that wins or not, will be the major way we interact with computers, a major way. We'll still use web and mobile, but you can do task-based things better through an assistant than any other way. If you're clicking on links and trying to integrate information, having an assistant that knows you and can help automate is a better way for many, many tasks. And so what's our business model? If we end up winning, being one of the winners in the space, there will be ways to make money. There's an App Store-like model, and the App Store providers make billions by taking small pieces.
Much like Alexa does with tasks now.
Exactly. There's the web search engine, where you have sponsored advertising in careful ways. You have to be very, especially with an assistant where trust is so important, have very clear guidelines of where that happens. But there is opportunity there for discovery. And there are new models, which when the marketplace comes out in a few months and you can now publish your services, there will be new models that are assistant-specific that the web and mobile don't capture today. So my answer is we will make money like the web giants and the App Store providers and more, but it's all in aid of giving you new transactions, new content, highlighting your brand in a new channel that you're not tapping into today. So it's more business for everybody.
Do you think there is a way that some of the generation that we have right now are still not using or still not trusting agents like that the way they already could, because we're just used to them failing? As I said before, we love to ask Siri things it can't have an answer to.
Yeah. Well, so the reason I think assistants have not taken the big leap, besides the four I listed, is people don't know what they can do and they can't do.
Yeah.
And using speech, it's very hard to know the boundaries, right? And so, You ask A, and it works. You say, like, what's the weather? Hey, that was great. Then you ask B, and it doesn't do that. It doesn't know about that, so it fails. And you're like, oh, and people feel now stupid that they asked something and it failed. And they ask C, and if that fails, they'll say, I'm just going to ask what's the weather. That works for me. Right? So a big problem is people don't know the boundaries. I think once you start to craft your own assistant out of the brands you like and that you can trust already today on the web and through apps, you now know what this assistant can do. And when you make a request and it says, oh, I can't do that yet, but here's a marketplace where you can find services. And so the user takes an active role to shaping their own assistant. I think they'll have a much clearer picture of what it does, what it doesn't do, and when it doesn't do it, how to get it to do it. So I think that'll be a huge opportunity that is not well addressed today. The last point I want to make on the business models, when the marketplace comes out, there's not going to be a lot of apps capsules there yet. And there is clear first mover advantage to getting in early. The reason we're opening the Bixby beta program or early access program now is so you can start building content and services that will appear and be featured in the marketplace when the marketplace comes out. And often in app stores and even web, the early providers who delivered quality value but took foothold, it's really hard to move them. They became the giants, the Pandoras, the Skypes, these things. I think there is early mover advantage into getting there. So I encourage everyone, download Bixby today.
So why do we go again with an app store? I mean, I worked on Firefox OS. I know firsthand how app stores can die quickly, although they have a lot of content in them. Why not an if this then that kind of idea, that basically different skills could talk to each other and find each other as well?
Difference in Bixby, through the dynamic program generation, different skills do talk to each other and find each other under the user control. In terms of if, then that style, I think that's a platform feature. We don't support it today, but we will be continually improving the platform and allowing more hooks, more opportunity, and more interaction styles that your services will plug in. And again, I think the framework, the architecture of just providing a weather service from lat long and returns this information without too much a priori knowledge of the use case that's being explicitly asked, and having a dynamic way of assembling those according to user request, I think that fits very, very well for a very different interaction style than we have today. So it is already compositional in a way that most assistants are not, and I think it will only get more so.
How do you avoid flooding with lots and lots of assistant features that are just terrible, much like most app stores are now full 80% of apps that never get downloaded?
Yeah, we want user control. So as I said, if the assistant doesn't do something, it can take you to a store, and there will be some ranking, right? As best we can do, we will surface the skills and capsules that we think are appropriate to best handle that request. But it's the user chooses. They say, oh, I like this brand. I like that brand. Let me try it out. That works well for me. Let me add this. Let me add another one. Let me change it. And so we see a world where assistants are, as I said at point 4, personalizable and configurable under user control. And they will get to choose the experience, ultimately, that they want of the coherent Bixby made up of all the experiences you've developed for your services and content.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.